Hello and welcome to our final day of Real Estate Live UK and the second week of our virtual events brought to you by White Label, our partners and sponsors. We hope you've been enjoying the week of events so far. We're really looking forward to hearing from you, our audience, as much as possible during each of our panels. So to kick off, we're about to launch a poll question asking our key question of the event. What is the most important factor in unlocking development and ensuring the continued strength of UK real estate? Poll will be live for a short while, so I'll give everybody time to complete their answers. We asked a similar question during our event in June, and we'll be sharing the results and comparisons at the end of the week. Thank you for that. During the session, please continue to interact using Zoom's Q&A. Hopefully you're all familiar with that by now, and we're looking forward to putting those questions to the speakers. As you can see, we've got some great speakers joining us for our session this morning. A topic that's very close to my heart and very topical at the moment, the future of the high street and retail. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to our chair for the event. It's Mark Faithfull, who will introduce you to the speakers. Many thanks, Mark.
Thanks very much, Faye, and good morning, everybody. I think the high street is nothing, a very emotive subject. I think, it's one of those that crosses both of our professional and our personal lives. I think it's something that people feel very strongly about. And obviously, as we know, high streets have been going through quite torrid times for, 10, 20 years now, for a variety of different reasons. And now COVID-19 has come along as well. So that's no further ado from me. I'd like to say that currently we have three panelists. We are going to have a fourth. We have Jackie Mulligan, who is CEO and founder of Shop Happy. We have John Hoyle, who's also CEO and founder of Sook, and we have Dan Cunningham, who's director of Assembly Line. We have got a speaker coming from Edmonton shopping centre. There's going to be Mark Bradbury. He's going to join us a little bit later, so we'll segue him in as he arrives. The way the session is going to work, we're going to have some very brief presentations from the panel, and then we're going to get into a Q&A. As Faye said, we really encourage input from you guys, so get your questions across in the Q&A panel, and I'll ask as many of them as I can in the hour. And so to kick us off, Jackie, can I ask you to say a few words?
Yep, so my name's Jackie and I am founder of shophappy.com. And basically that platform started 4 years ago because we needed to build digital resilience into our high streets. And now, more than ever, particularly during COVID, we've seen that digitisation accelerate. Our platform enables people to support multiple businesses on a local high street, proceed through one checkout and click and collect or delivery. And it's an aggregator. And what we are seeing currently is the aggregators, the big online giants, making significant revenues right now because people are staying at home. And the problem is with all of this is that our local high streets and many of our small businesses lose out. So I love the topic, future of the high street, but I think we all have to be very pragmatic and know that none of us know it. None of us know what the future is going to set forth for us. None of us know what's going to happen from Monday. So basically what we have to do is think more about what is the future we want to shape, and we all need to work towards that. And the person who's joining us, Mark Bradbury, I did invite because Sabri sadly couldn't make it, and he's Director of Property and Economy at Enfield Council. And hopefully if he makes it with the public transport, which is probably another future trend, he will appear on this panel to talk about the amazing inroads that council is making in terms of the new sort of balancing that we've got between city and out of town too. So it's another theme that I really think is going to maybe democratise or rebalance an economy that perhaps has been a little bit too city-centric and maybe not sustainable enough for our own communities.
Thank you, Jackie. Well, transport and infrastructure was one of the options on that opinion poll, so maybe Mark would tick that one. John, if you could introduce yourself and say a few words on the high street as well to kick us off.
Absolutely, thank you very much. I'm a kindred spirit with Jackie, and I'm the founder of Sook, which is a platform that rents shops by the hour, and we're trying to maximise the utility of shops across the entire spectrum of the week to make it inclusive, not just for retailers, but for community and all sorts of other groups who want to make use of the thousands of spaces that we have that aren't being used well on our high streets. We do this by putting together a modular fit out that we can drop into any space that you can, as a digital canvas, that using our website, you can drop whatever content you want onto the lighting, furniture and staffing solution. So you can create a bespoke environment showcase a product or a service, have a meetup, have a party, do whatever you want in that space at any time. And we're hoping that's going to bring lots of life back to our streets, and indeed it is in our existing sites. And I wanted to start with that context because when we launched, it was about making a conscious effort to operate in an area where we could actually add value. I'm a property developer by trade, formerly at Grosvenor, so I understand the numbers behind retail, and I didn't want to try and attempt to solve the wider high street problem, which is, as we all know, a beast. So we focused relentlessly on what I think is the biggest problem in the high street, which is the broken relationship between landlord and occupier, which, when you think about it, is at the centre of so many of the issues, creating vanilla high streets where only the most financially powerful brands can survive, which in turn leads to sort of out of control occupation costs, where rents drive rates, which are another sort of separate problem. And all of this contributes to empty shops because of such high barriers to entry. And we as a kind of industry are all complicit in creating this situation where essentially there's a disconnect between the commercial environment surrounding the high street and the people who actually use it. And Corona's exposed these absurdities, which actually I think gives us a great opportunity to take stock and be like, okay, that's a bit bonkers. Why don't we do it differently? One of the things that I think is a really good example of this is actually the way that retail has operated for decades, which is, when you think about it, a little bit ridiculous. When retailers take large capital contributions from landlords so that they in return pay an inflated rent over a long-term rental commitment, they then spend all that cash on creating what is to all intents and purposes a warehouse. This is filled with millions of pounds worth of stocks, which puts pressure on their cash flow. And then these places have to be staffed and operated across 7 days of the week, when in reality, they're only actually making money for a tiny percentage of that. That to me doesn't make sense. And what Sook is about is trying to let those people operate in the hours that they need them. And then when they don't need them, to let those spaces be available to all sorts of other people. And a lot of that is completely unrelated to retail at the rest of the time.
Okay.
And just to finish off, in terms of what I'm interested in terms of the context of this, it's how we can help governments and local authorities not have to exist in isolation to solve this massive problem, and also how we can convince landlords to take a different view about how to engage with their occupiers.
Thanks, John. Lots of good points there, and I think you're right. I think the whole look at the use of the high street, not just in terms of permanent buildings, but in terms of what's done within those buildings, and all the things that need to happen to make that happen effectively is incredibly important, and I'm sure subject we'll spend some more time on over the next hour. Diane, if I could come to you to say a few opening words.
Thanks, Mark. I'm Diane Cunningham from the Assembly Line, and we're an independent consultancy working on high street projects. A lot of the work we do is engaging directly with market traders and high street businesses, so business owners, and the people who use high streets as well. So obviously a topic that we're very immersed in, really interested as to what's going on at the moment in terms of the COVID situation. It's quite easy to be bogged down in the doom and gloom around sort of drops in sales figures, the rise of online, the kind of decline of the high street narrative, which I think a lot of the media has been running for years now without really much context around what's actually happening. So I think it is a time of pain and change for many, but there's also quite a lot of opportunities out there. Certainly with our clients, we're seeing new markets coming through, kind of sort of markets being reviewed, strategies are rewritten as to how they can adapt and learn from what's changed during COVID. And certainly looking around locally, there was lots of changes in both business models, what people were selling, how they were doing it. And I think, that there is much more opportunity in what's ahead than there is perhaps the doom and gloom that we're more often presented with. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion, seeing what the audience have got to join in with the conversation too.
Thank you very much, Diane. And yes, again, some good points there. And I think I should also say, I think, one of the purposes of today's session, I think we're all very aware of the travails that exist on many high streets around the UK. So we'll try and focus on some of the solutions and some of the positive ways that we might move forward. Jackie, if I can come to you with the first question. I think one of the things that struck me up until quite recently was that, whenever anyone talked about reviving the high street, the focus seemed to be very much on how you replace the vacant stores with new shops, even though there has been mounting evidence that there are not the new players to come in and fill those stores. So it was always an unrealistic expectation. COVID does seem to have moved the conversation on a bit, and people seem to be talking about the high street a bit more cohesively and talking about it doing a lot of different things. So, you know, given that we're still in this pandemic situation, how are you seeing things changing, and are you seeing sort of accelerations in some of the trends that you noted before?
Yeah, so obviously there's been the acceleration of digital. So, you know, £1 in every £3 is now being spent online, and that has opened the market to very, very new players. I actually never thought that leaving void units was unrealistic. I just thought it was unambitious, to be honest. I think the point is that these hearts are extremely important to our local economies, and we shouldn't accept one narrative which says out of town and warehouses are the future and we should deny the hearts of our communities. And actually what we've seen during lockdown is 85,000 new businesses starting during lockdown. Now, many of those have started as purely online players, but when we come out of COVID, I don't know about you, Mark, and I don't know about you, Diane, but I am right out there, socialising, mixing, gin bars, vaccine hanging out my arm. I want to engage. And so I think there will be a revenge consumption going on. People will want to be out in those social spaces. So now I would say is the time to get in and maybe look at those units if you've got an online business that seems to be cracking off. We've got people in living rooms who've been on furlough, suddenly thought, you know what, did I really want this career anyway? Who might be thinking about their own enterprise. So actually I feel, and I am a bit of a relentless optimist, but I do believe there is a potential for those, and initiatives like Sook are so bang on the money, because we do have to take away we have to de-risk it as much as possible, and we have to enable people to co-share those units. But absolutely, there is a future for physical businesses, but it's going to need leadership, it's going to need innovation, it's going to need investment. But if we want to have a more level playing field and a more sort of differentiated, disaggregated economy where more players benefit, more small cats rather than one big fat cat, then we have to put money and investment where our hearts are.
Thank you, Jackie. John, I'm going to ask you, about what you're hoping that Sook brings to the high street, and how that can be done. And also, with your background, I've got a first question from the audience. Question one, planning system revamps. I mean, obviously, one of the issues that the high street has had is that if people want to move to more of a hybrid model, or they want to do different things with their outlets, often planning is not keeping up with the sort of fluidity of new ideas. So interested in your comments on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, from a planning perspective, obviously there have been massive changes during Corona that have actually made life a lot easier. We were intending on operating within an A1 use, but just only not exceeding 10% of any use outside of that, and trying to push the boundaries as much as possible, because our solution is generally much desired and needed by communities. So we thought we'd get away with it essentially, but that has been blown out of the water by the fact that now there is such flexibility to do whatever you want in spaces. I think maybe you could argue it's gone a bit too far in terms of the development angle, but from a flexible retail perspective, it's a real gift for us. And what we're trying to achieve is really be that catalyst that Jackie was talking about, where you can be one of these 80,000 odd new businesses, and without having to bet your house, you can test in physical space and fail at a price that is acceptable for a couple of £100, and learn about what your customers actually want, find that product market fit, and we want to be the place of choice to do that. Unfortunately, the existing incumbents in kind of flexible space are actually prohibitively expensive for most people, and you'll like this, Jackie, but I always say to our investors that we're much more about Stevenage than we are about Shoreditch, because it's about creating that in a mass market environment rather than just exclusive wealthy London places, because there are entrepreneurs in Rochdale, there are entrepreneurs in Letchworth. They're not all exclusively in London, and we want to be the facilitator of their success.
No, again, some very good points. And just sort of generally on planning, John, I mean, there are obviously some revisions going at the moment, or some plans for it to be looked at again. But is your sense that planning is one of the inhibitors? Because it does, as I said, it does seem that there are a lot of bright ideas out there that don't fit neatly into the boxes that were originally created, and that planning isn't always the most dynamic of sectors to try and keep up with that innovation. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, as I said, I think it has been an inhibitor. The changes make things much simpler now. We've tried to develop a model that operates sort of within the rules of the game, because it's impossible to try and change it. But the more flexibility there can be for people that drive congregation in our town centres, I think the better.
Thank you. And Diane, are you seeing a new attitude to the high street at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with both Jackie and John that it has to be easier for people to start up. A lot of work we've done around markets was getting people to use market stalls as test incubator settings already, and a lot of them did go on to either trade online or run shops that, you know, are still very much going. So it's around making it kind of accessible, affordable, less paperwork in terms of getting people up and going. I think as well, we touched on sort of it's not about replacing retail with retail. That there's lots of interesting reuse and repurposing we're seeing at the moment as well. And I think there was a study out last week around how retail is no longer the attractor to high streets. It's much more around perhaps the social element and the eating and these kind of wider experience offers, which again have been talked about for ages, but COVID is just sort of accelerating all of those changes really.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth remembering that, you know, when you talk about market stalls, that many of the very familiar names on the high street of the last 50 to 100 years started in market stalls. And, you know, even something as comparatively recent as Superdry, you know, started on a market stall. So, yes, there's nothing new under the sun, is there? That's for sure. So if we look at now maybe opportunities, and perhaps I'll come back to you, Jackie. I mean, you know, where's the low-hanging fruit? Where do we start to make some measurable differences to the high street and to get things to be a bit more dynamic?
Well, certainly through COVID, what we saw was food and essentials being a new thing. So, you know, obviously the supermarkets initially didn't look like they were able to cope with the supplies and actually getting people delivery slots. And suddenly our small shops, our grocers, our butchers, our cheesemongers, etc., came to the fore. So I think there's a big interest, not necessarily street food and takeaway, which was obviously all the rage, but now I think we'll have challenges, but actually people doing locally produced food. And I think that's also going to be shaped somewhat by other political decisions that are coming from January around local supply chain and localisation, more people being interested in provenance and things like that. So I think there's particularly interest there. The other big thing we're seeing is makers, arts and producers coming to the fore again. So maybe the hobbyists coming in. And just an important point as well is that not every small business that starts up wants to become the next Marks and Spencers or you know, Superdry. There are lifestylers. So people make lifestyle choices when they do a high street, because many of them want, you know, it's been something they've wanted to do to have their passion, to talk to people, to make people feel good, whether it's a bookshop or whatever. It doesn't always have to end up being Waterstones. And I think that's where the economic regen is really interesting, because those small businesses that get a hold in a high street are really invested emotionally and financially in that high street, much more so than a giant that may be thinking from a distant boardroom, that postcode doesn't look very effective, let's chop it.
Yeah.
So I say the low-hanging fruit is small hobbies, food and drink and essentials, basically. And
Jackie, if I just stick on you just for one moment, particularly about high streets in areas that are, you know, struggling with maybe quite a poor catchment. I mean, you know, I think we can all see, you know, I mean, things like market towns will continue to thrive, but, you know, they're all popular already. They're attractive. They've often got quite an affluent catchment around them. They've got all the things that give a new business, you know, the potential to believe that they may be successful, you know, but there are an awful lot of high streets that have none of those attributes. How do we revive those, or how do we start to revive those?
Well, you don't start by thinking you need to gentrify them, which is
sure.
often what seems to happen. You need to make a relevant high street to its relevant community. And the best thing you can do is look at the mix. Is this high street servicing the community? Are the products available on the high street 3 hairdressers and a betting shop? Or is there actually a food shop, a convenience shop? Is there a range? But the problem we have is that often everything becomes potentially gentrified and you lose that connection then, and you basically detach people, you dislocate people from where they belong and their own economic potential. So for me, I think the most important thing for councils, etc., will be to look at their communities, look at the provision, and make sure that every community is well served. 16% of our population live 200 metres from a high street. So we want every high street to have the right shops and services if we want a happy place and a happy planet. That's essentially, it's a sustainable centre we all should be working towards. It doesn't have to mean it's an expensive one.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackie. Well, Diane, same question to you. Where do you see the opening opportunities, the things that can make a quick difference before we look at the longer term strategies?
Certainly around looking at the enterprise and local elements, so connecting to that sort of local catchment that Jackie alluded to, so involving local people and local businesses in that conversation about how the high street needs to adapt, finding out what residents actually want. I think right now there's obviously in some places there's a completely different catchment to the one that's normally there, because you've got people out commuting. There might be people who've never ever used that high street or town centre before now, and suddenly they are. So there's a real conversation to be had around how that might look in the future. We don't know if people will go back to 5 days a week in an office. It seems unlikely. Maybe there'll be a hybrid model where it's a mix. But it is, a good story for local high streets versus bigger cities, that there's a new approach now to be had. And certainly kind of the hobbies, etc. We're seeing kind of cycle hubs and empty spaces. There's lots of things that were perhaps again in the offing and in discussion but haven't yet happened. And I think this is the positive outputs of what's coming through now.
No, absolutely. And I think we'll touch on work from home, or what is undoubtedly going to be flexible working and that's impact on the high street a little bit later on. John, just to sort of finish off, where do you see the sort of opening opportunities and the sort of quick wins that can make a difference?
I think, well, it's all about accessibility for me, and the democratization of the spaces to be used for the right things, for the right people. And I think at a time where we've never had more retail in the world, with online digitally native brands absolutely booming, the fact that we are failing to accommodate them in our physical spaces is a huge missed opportunity. And it's not difficult. It's only economics that really are preventing it. And I'd lost faith in landlords, the ability to actually see that. Hence the fact that we came up with Sook as a sort of middleman to create that facilitation. But I could be cut out of the market by these guys if they were able to think differently quickly, which is one of the problems that their own flexibilities that prevent that.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted. Well, I think Mark Bradbury is sort of with us. So when he comes back on, I'll introduce him. So that's good news. Here we go. There's Mark. So Mark, thank you very much for stepping into the breach. It's very much appreciated. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just quickly introducing yourself and just saying perhaps a few words about how you're re-looking at the high street in your local area now.
Okay, hi guys. Sorry I'm late. I'm a late substitute for one of our great businesses in Enfield. Sabri couldn't join today. So I'm Director of Property and Economy at Enfield Council. And as the name suggests, I'm responsible for property assets, which include the freehold of a number of shopping centres and our economic development. And we've been, I'm sure other speakers have referred to a number of the things I'll say, because it's always difficult when you come in late and not heard everybody else's introductions. But we clearly were looking at town centres pre-COVID. Everybody was. There were challenges then. And really what COVID has done is amplified some of the problems, but it's also amplified some of the solutions, and it's encouraged people to really look at how can we address these things. So we've got a series of programs across our 5 key town centres where we're building action plans with our communities, our business communities, our local communities. As has just been said, some of those communities will be slightly different now. People who perhaps wouldn't have come in during the week because they were somewhere else. So we perhaps need to relook at that. But what we're looking to do is to look at how we can accelerate those solutions that have now been amplified. So, with Jackie and her team at Shop Happy, we were very keen early on in lockdown to look at how businesses could reconnect with their communities in a different way afterwards. So we put a deal together with Shop Happy to offer businesses free access to that platform. We put a team together to talk to those businesses, to show them how to best present themselves online, and in particular we work with partners to expand the local delivery. So local is the new mantra for our town centres, and getting those local businesses to a wider community has been part of our strategy. We're looking longer term. We're looking, just referenced now to co-working space. We're looking at how we can accelerate that, because as a suburban borough with suburban town centres, we're perhaps seeing footfall affected less than others. Not to say there's not a huge problem in footfall terms still, and we need to rebuild that confidence. But what we are seeing is local people not necessarily wanting to work from home, but wanting to work near home, and we need to look at how we can capitalise on that, and that will in turn have a spin-off benefit for retailers and the hospitality industry. So really, we've got a number of projects we're working on, including changing our own office portfolio. And the mantra is faster, deeper. How do we get on and do this stuff faster, and how do we delve deeper into where the opportunities are and make them reality?
Okay, thanks, Mark. That's really interesting. Just sorry, I don't know the answer to this, but do you own any of the shopping centres in your local high streets?
We own the freeholds of the Edmonton Green Centre that Sabri would have talked about had he been able to join us today. We own the freehold of the two main centres in Enfield, but they're on long leases.
Right.
We are collaborating for the longer term with both of our head lessees around redevelopment plans aimed at bringing in more diversity, more leisure, more residential, more office. So we have a role to play, but we're not the asset manager.
No, fine, okay, interesting. I'm delighted to say that our viewers have been very active, so I'm going to come off script and start asking questions from them. By nature, they'll be a little bit random. I'm just going to work through the order they've been sent. So the first one is from Lucy Moore, who asks, so COVID and the existing challenges in retail and high street presents an opportunity to radically rethink architecture and spaces of production and consumption, or how they are articulated in our towns and cities. So quite a big question to the speakers. What one radical change would you like to see? And John, I'm going to ask you first.
Well, it sounds a bit boring, but I think it's really important, and that's logistics. There's obviously a huge online framework for delivering goods to people that we've all been making use of through Corona, and that's going to grow. And at the moment, shops are used as part of the logistics chain, which I think in a lot of cases doesn't make sense. But I think there is probably a healthy blend in the new world between a sort of click and collect type element on high streets that drives footfall and also keeps DPD vehicles off our streets, versus the existing logistics platform. And I think that needs to be considered as part of any retail unit in the future.
Jackie, if you could see one radical change, what would it be?
I think I want a radical shift. I think we've become quite, we're not incentivising businesses to engage and collaborate. So what we do is we moan and bemoan the online and want to tax and punish these people who've innovated and created a solution for consumers, when in fact what we should be doing is incentivising businesses to adapt. And that could be with landlords, that could be with the businesses, the councils, etc. Is what rewards, what can we do to help these businesses adapt and make it easier, but also benefit them financially, potentially, for doing it, and not constantly go at trying to bring everybody down, try and bring everybody up.
Diane, same question to you. What's the one big radical change you'd like to see?
I think it's more around the stakeholder piece. So I think councils are going to be under more pressure in terms of the budgets going forward. You've got the big property management firms who are doing some really interesting things in public realm because they're a bit nimbler and able to do it, but that all needs to be sort of quite joined up in partnership. I think some of that is coming together already, but it'll be good to perhaps see a more equal relationship between all the parties on high streets and in town centres so that things happen a bit quicker.
And Mark, I'm sure there's all sorts of radical changes you'd like to make, but if you can only pick one, what would it be?
Okay, well, I've talked about this before on other platforms, that clearly we need to see a change in the way landlords respond to this situation. We need to see more flexibility around the change of use, but perhaps we need to learn the lessons from the housing that's been developed under PDR and really think about what's the best solution for this. There's the free for all isn't necessarily the right solution. It may be part of the solution. So what I'd like to see is greater adoption of local development orders alongside a freeing up of compulsory purchase, so that local authorities can take. I'm not saying local authorities need to own all of our town centres, but if we're going to democratise it, there are some people who are frankly in the way. They don't get it, they're not moving fast enough, and perhaps their idea of the solution is not the quality we seek. So for me, I'd like to see a little bit of flexibility around how local authorities can curate and bring together ownership more quickly.
Okay, and actually, if I can stick with you, Mark, because the next question is asking about, and this is from Alan Crawford, asking about more affordable housing above shops. Obviously, residential above shops has been quite typical in many high streets and local towns. Is there something that could be done to encourage that and to make it affordable?
Yes, obviously, where I talked before about how we were working with our shopping centre owners, and part of that strategy is to bring in more residential. Having the freehold ownership and having some degree of control does enable us to use more than just planning measures. But the question is right. There's a huge amount of currently underutilised space above our shops, and previous measures to get that back into residential use haven't worked. So again, perhaps greater flexibility for the public sector to step in, take control of that space might help. But equally, I think we will see, as I say, there will be some people who don't get it and don't get it for a while, but we're already seeing a lot of, particularly the more institutional landowners, starting to realise they've got wasted assets. How can we use them better?
Okay, thanks, Mark. Very interesting. I'm going to go on to cycle lanes next, and our next questioner says, does the panel think that cycle lanes on primary high street locations is an impediment or a bonus to high street operators? I'm saying in various other cities, thriving restaurants, shops and hotels have sometimes been hit by innovations because the clients can't access them easily. Jackie, any thoughts about cycle lanes? Good, bad, indifferent?
With my rusty old bike in the garage, but I think there is actually evidence, isn't there, around cycling and pedestrians actually spending more on high streets. It increases dwell time, linger, etc. We're going to see more cycling logistics. Last mile, Shop Happy is using bikes wherever it can to do deliveries and home deliveries from local shops. So, and there's too much traffic. I live in just outside Bradford. We have a terrible air pollution issue. So, I don't want to walk around if I feel like I'm breathing in fumes, and it has massive health detriments. So this is a pain point. We are all in a horrific pain point, and we have to turn, and it's going to hurt. But what we have to do is focus on what is the end game here. We've got a climate emergency. We've got too much traffic. We've got a need to support our town centres. We're going to have to make some innovations that are going to temporarily hurt, but long-term benefit our communities and our economies. And unfortunately, that's just what we've got to go through. I think everyone has to weigh up what's going to happen, but there's obviously going to be, you don't make an omelette without breaking eggs, as they say.
Diane, any thoughts on cycle lanes or infrastructure and access in general?
I think there's often a disconnect between when you survey business owners, they're very much convinced that their customers travel by car to the shops. So that there's always an immediate pushback that there's no parking, people won't drop off on the way to or from somewhere. A lot of it's sort of proven not to be the case. It's more normally about the businesses needing parking or delivery access. I think if you look at what Waltham Forest have done, their Mini Holland programme is quite widely talked about, but they've been through sort of enormous pain in creating that as well over the last 5 years. And I think what we're seeing now is sort of cycle lanes and low traffic neighbourhoods is quite similar. It's all really emotive, and people sort of who have a car. I don't have a car, but I'm not anti-car. But if you've got a car and you're used to using it, if you're suddenly putting in a lot of obstacles in people's place, it can be quite challenging for them to adopt. So I think we just have to look at these long term. I think some of the cycle lanes that went in are now coming out because they've perhaps not been the right answer. But overall, it's still good that we're having these conversations to work out, where they will work and actually bring more business. And that's sort of related to footfall as well and pedestrian access. So anything that's, whether it's public transport, bikes or on foot, how can we get people walking past high streets and using them and dropping off as part of their journey?
And John, I mean, obviously with your former hat on with Grosvenor, I'm sure you thought a lot about placemaking, kind of public realm access. They're very important issues, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'll keep it short. I love bikes and I live near Cambridge. That's part of the reason it works really well in Cambridge. You take your life into your hands occasionally, but, I think it would be a backward step to move back to cars. And public realm is also really important. Just sort of blending with the last question about radical changes, thinking about how that can be more interactive and particularly based around seasons, I think is really important. We don't necessarily consider it in the same way as we do internal space for retail, and it should be, because it really adds fantastic value. Just on a completely unrelated note, I can't believe none of us actually mentioned in the radical changes rates, which I've never been on a retail panel, I don't think, in the last year where that hasn't come up, but it's definitely an area that could look at doing something radical. Something needs to change there.
No, absolutely. And I mean, obviously that is being looked at the moment, isn't it? But clearly it's all of these things are going to take time. And I think, moving forwards quickly is of the utmost importance. Mark, again, maybe opening up a little bit, sort of transport policy in general. I mean, I guess, as Diana identified, I think a lot of people are, keen on walking and cycling, but, a perennial complaint about high streets is lack of parking or expensive parking. So how do you marry those two issues?
It's a challenge, but if we are genuinely talking about catering for a local audience, the days when you built big stuff and people drove to it as a matter of course are over. They've been over for a while. There's a few exceptions, obviously the mega shopping centres, but I've just come through earlier this morning on the train underneath Westfield, Stratford. The vast majority of people who come to that shopping centre, which is always rammed, come by public transport. Yes, car parks are part of that. But if the point is, if we're genuinely going to appeal to a local audience, we've got to make it easier for them to have a range of choices of how they get there and not feel that the only safe option is the car. So we need to balance all of this out. But we also need to remember that ultimately, however they come, when they're actually shopping, they're pedestrians. And if the environment, as Jackie says, is dominated by traffic, by fumes and the likes, they're not going to hang around. They're not going to spend as much as they like. They're not going to sit and watch the world go by with a coffee in the same way that they do. And certainly with our suburban town centres, central cities, now, yes, there is traffic. It is still an issue. It's generally slower moving because it's forced to be. But if it's faster moving, the like. So I think there's a balance here between getting the public realm right so that when you are shopping, that is when you are spending money, you are a pedestrian, and that environment entices you to stay and spend, and then look at how do we look a range of means of getting there, all of which are open to the majority of people, except that some people will have to drive, some people will not be able to drive because they don't have that economic choice. So it's about that choice, and it's about balance. And if you make it easier to walk or cycle, less people will need to drive. It'll actually mean that those who choose to will also find it easier.
Yeah. Mark, if I can just stick with you for a moment. In fact, we've got a lot of questions, so I might start directing them to individuals rather than doing the whole panel, if that's okay, just so we can try and get through as many as possible. But Mark, just a quick one, and you talked about compulsory purchases a little bit earlier on, but one of the points that's been made is, is it time to start consolidating the retail elements of the town centre when there's a lot of vacant space, so that you can do things with the sort of secondary and tertiary locations? Is that sort of thing that you guys will be looking at, or the potential?
Yeah, I think that's my point, is that, I'm old enough to remember the old days when Norwich Union owned half the high streets in the country, and they curated them. You'd get asset management. What we've now got is lots of individual owners all fighting for the best covenant and the best rent. And that's a broken model now. So, it's an overused word, but town centres are about the right mix. And and as part of that, somebody's going to have to accept that the anchor tenants who pay less rent need to be applied in the high street as much as they do in the shopping centres. You need those businesses that maybe can't afford the rent that others can. So, I do think that whether it's through partnership, and Peter Brett Associates and the British Property Federation a few years ago talked about sort of town centre REITs as a sort of model for this. But I do think the ownerships or the owners need to get together, collaborate, curate, and accept that not every rent is going to be the highest you can possibly achieve. And if we don't do that, then you're not going to fix it.
No, absolutely. Jackie, I've got another question here. I'm going to direct to you. The online halo effect, the halo effect of having a store on online sales. How are you seeing the relationship at the moment with the work you're doing, and how does it get priced in as well? Which is
I think there is a massive influence effect now for online. Particularly, we surveyed our businesses, and 92% of them said people are browsing less in physical stores. It's obvious, really. You're not comfortable necessarily in a physical environment like you used to be. Just after first lockdown, 61% of us were more nervous about going into physical stores. And I can only see that increasing over the coming weeks with all the recent announcements. So pre-browsing becomes really important. So I just recently actually wrote a blog about browsing e-commerce. And what this is basically people are using Shop Happy, and they use, other sites, I'm sure, as well, but let's focus on Shop Happy. They're browsing, and then obviously when they're looking at the products, they're going in with the mindset to spend. What our town centres were suffering from pre-COVID was people were going into town to have a coffee and not thinking about spending. So if they had footfall, they didn't have an intention to spend. So we have to get intention to spend. And the only way you can get intention to spend is if you show people what they can buy. So there's a clear link. So now what we're focusing on is that pre-browsers, get the shops to put as many products as possible to influence that footfall, which is going to be 10 times as difficult to get. But when you can't get the footfall, when you don't really want people in your town centres because of COVID, local lockdowns, let the businesses trade as they want to. There is a definite halo effect between online. The other thing is on social media. There's been work by Polly Barnfield, maybe, around social engagement. And, what we saw during COVID was more people online, much more, and more businesses not online. So we need to connect the two and use that space. That digital place now couldn't be more important for enabling vulnerable people, or people who simply just feel vulnerable, to still be part of their places. It's just that they're digital places now. So, there's a significant halo effect and an increased spend. So one of our businesses recently reported that for every week now they get an additional day of trade because of Shop Happy, because of that online presence. And certainly people might just be using social and getting similar effects. So it's just pointless ever talking now about a purely offline situation. That's gone.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. I've got another question here, really about what's happened to vacant units, which I'll direct to you if that's okay, John. Pointing out that often the vacant units either don't get filled, or they get filled by things that don't necessarily add to. We're talking a lot about curation that don't necessarily add to the curation of a high street. Presumably one of the the things you're seeking to do is to try and encourage those businesses to sort of test the water that might actually bring something a bit different. And, I guess along with, what Jackie's talking about, it's about removing the obstacles to taking physical space perhaps in the longer term, because I guess, first of all, there's a lot of doom being spoken about the high street, but secondly, it's quite an expensive business to open your first shop.
Yeah. So, the business case for shops is sort of much more challenging. The reason we're seeing this really challenging moment right now, obviously because of Corona, is because it's the high fixed costs of the traditional retail model are really hard to sustain. And so what we're trying to do is drive accessibility for everyone. And what that does is it allows an international retail brand that's never, ever had a presence in the UK suddenly to access a consumer in local places through that accessibility, which not only is really interesting for the local market to see something that they've never seen before, which we hope will drive footfall through FOMO and excitement and novelty, but it also can be used and applied, as we discussed before, to all of the digitally native brands who, again, people want to see that in places that are not traditionally known as premium retail locations. There are still consumers and customers there. They just don't want to go into a tired vanilla high street of the like that we are all so used to, which is full of essentially crap retail. And the other element of it is I think, driving accessibility for the community bit, because our high streets are where they are because they are geographically accessible. And we're not making enough of the utility of those spaces for everyone to do all sorts of other things in and drive effectively footfall around events. And that's one of the things that we've found with our Sook model is that on a Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, we drive more revenue before 10 a.m. and after 6 p.m. than we do in the entire retail hours in between. And that's pretty telling, isn't it? It shows that people want to use the spaces, but they don't want to use them for retail. And if we're not accommodating that, then we're missing an opportunity to drive life.
Absolutely. No, very interesting. I'm going to actually throw this open to the whole panel, but I'm going to start with Diane, because I think it's such a big subject. Digital technology, how should we be using it better to enhance the experience and improve public space for the wider community? And just actually one of the things I'd like to pick up on, also add to that, is about social media. I think, clearly, particularly if you're putting on things that are going to be temporary, both town centres and the players within it, using social media effectively to make sure that people know it's on before they've missed it, is becoming incredibly important.
I found it so incredibly frustrating during early lockdown when I was trying to figure out who on earth was open and what their opening hours were, and it was an absolute lottery. In the end, I just walked the streets every day and found out who was open, and that was who I shopped with. But it's already simple things like that. It's just sort of, I think everybody was caught on the back foot when lockdown came in originally, and hopefully they would be better prepared next time. But just that basic contact info is so easy. Whether you're on Shop Happy or a Google My Business page, to just let people know where you are. The social media just needs to be part of that overall piece these days. I think. Previously we used to look at kind of what was going on in stores. Somebody else was perhaps running a social media program. Somebody else was running events. Somebody else was doing a loyalty scheme or a marketing campaign amongst the local neighbourhood. I think all of that just needs to be joined up, and it's a piece about the place. It's not all these sort of disparate strands. And it's creating those reasons to visit. So as we've already talked about, it's not just about retail. So if you are building an event program and you've got other things going on, then it's making sure that that's all going through one channel, really, that people can access it easily.
Mark, same question. What kind of work are you doing on the digital side? I mean, obviously you talked about some of the work with Jackie and Shop Happy, but what are some of the other main initiatives?
Sorry, I got kicked out for a few minutes, so I just missed the beginning of that.
Role of digital technology, basically,
yeah.
in the high street.
Yeah, I mean, we are looking at how, and Shop Happy is part of this because it offers you the ability to shop a basket of retailers in one go. Because, yes, we want to get more of our businesses online. We want to give them that extra day's trading that Jackie talked about, but we also need to get our whole town centres online. So we're looking at how we can do that. Shop Happy is a start because enables us to cluster town centres and for people to bring those together. But that's a big initiative for us. We're looking also at putting more information about our town centres online through things like podcasts and the likes, so that we can promote that offer. Because, as was said earlier, if you don't have a digital offer as part of your offer, I mean, to go back to the old days, people paid more for Zone A of the shop because it was at the front and people walking past could see what was in the shop. Therefore, it was more valuable. Your window display, your first rows. Retailers now need to understand that their shop window is the internet as much as it is the physical shop window. And so programs that help smaller businesses get online, programs that help whole town centres get online are key to this, and then building events around it so that when they come, there's things to be entertained by. And we had a really successful programme this summer called Enjoy Enfield Summer. It followed on from our campaign, which was Enjoy Enfield Safely, which was sort of getting the message across about social distancing. So Enjoy Enfield Summer was a street festival, basically, a series of pop-up things, zebra crossings, artwork on the walls. So it's not just digital, it is physical, but it is giving people a visual experience as well as a spatial experience.
Jackie, I'm sure you've got a few thoughts on the role of digital on the high street. One of the particular things, are there some really common problems or opportunities that you see, or maybe common mistakes that people are making?
Well, there are mistakes people make, maybe being a little bit miserable. There used to be a shopkeeper that would take pictures of herself looking really miserable saying, please come into my shop. And ultimately, that's not going to be a very successful post, is it? So, but you could understand her aspirations. Maybe there's a level of cheeriness that we need and green shoots we need and positivity right now. And also we need to make it personal. That's the difference on a high street. We make friendships on high streets. So our social media should reflect that and really focus on the emotional bond, because I have no emotional bond with Jeff Bezos. I have an emotional bond with Saltaire and my local shopkeepers, and I think most of us might feel the same. So we need to keep nibbling at that. Just in terms of physical space, though, because I didn't want to focus on digital technology because I'm banging on about that all the time. There are really good initiatives, like things like Aberdeen did amazing, they got New Art, I think they were called, which did amazing street art on buildings to get people to review and perceive the space differently. I mean, there are fantastic initiatives, the stuff that has been done around, umbrellas, coloured umbrellas, and making people look at their space differently. We are in the process of rediscovering our local high streets, reimagining them, looking at them in different ways. Yes, we look at them online, but when we're walking on the dog, we want to see new things and feel sort of captivated, especially when perhaps we're going to have our movement somewhat restricted. So thinking of what you can put that might not involve actual interaction, but maybe just a new look in a space is really important. So all of these initiatives will really help us reimagine and rediscover our places. And for us, we do put virtual events on Shop Happy, because even if you're running live events like Mark did over Enfield, we had an amazing arts trail that appeared on Shop Happy. 65 artists joined us in one town. 22,000 more people came to the site and started to interact with the businesses as well. So always have a virtual digital place alongside a real one, because you're going to need that for months and months and months and maybe longer. We probably needed it way before that.
John, same sort of question to you about, kind of combining digital and physical. And also I've got another question here just about public realm improvements, encouraging covered areas where people can have al fresco dining, more of a European model. Are there some things you'd like to be seen done on that side as well?
Do you want me to answer the digital one?
Yes, please.
Our tagline is we're trying to create the intersection between the digital and physical customer experience. So, I don't have a huge amount to add to what's already been said, but of course it is a blend, like anything that, if done well, it can be enormously beneficial to your brand. And what we're also trying to do is make that sort of light touch and analytically driven physical experience, so that you can learn from your performance of your units and quickly go to places at the right time with the right configuration of physical shop to maximize the efficiency of your engagement with customers. And I think that is that to me feels obvious. The idea of running a shop for 7 days a week and only really selling stuff on a Friday and Saturday, to me just seems mad. So we'll see whether that change gets adopted. We're obviously really at the vanguard of that, trying to make it happen. With the public realm, I mean, as a former sort of Grosvenor employee, where public realm is incredibly important, albeit with significant funds normally associated with doing it, you can see the benefits of having well-managed estates. Effectively, that is more difficult to achieve in provincial areas where perhaps there is not so much cash floating around, but place is all important. You've got to want to go and hang out in places. Otherwise, it just, the whole retail experience just becomes a job, and no one likes that.
No, thank you. I'm not going to get anywhere near through all these questions because I've got absolutely loads of them. One of the things that is coming up quite a bit is still transport, basically, and all the various modes. So perhaps I'm going to ask 2 questions of you, Diane, and then whisk round. Could ask everyone to be brief because we're nearly out of time. How do you make the high street accessible to everyone, however they want to come? Because that is going to take a lot of investment. And secondly, a lot of talk about the 15-minute city or the 20-minute city or neighbourhood rather. Your feelings about how that might be developing and what that might mean in practical terms. But I can only give everyone about a minute each, I'm afraid.
The 15-minute city kind of makes common sense. It's quite interesting. I think obviously in London, I think there's 600 high streets, so a lot of people will live very close to them already. But again, thinking about what's on those high streets, do they serve the local catchment area? They might be really nearby, but there's nothing there that attracts people. Public realm generally, and getting access to town centres. I guess it's just thinking about who needs access originally. There's some high streets that have been pedestrianised, but there was no kind of blue badge drop-off or disability entrance or exit to the town centre. So it's just trying to have those conversations and engagement at the start as to who might need access in different spaces. Thank you.
Mark, same question to you about, what you're sort of thinking around that much more kind of compact local amenity that can serves everyone within a very short distance and time.
Yeah, and it's not just about retail. So we have, we were looking at it anyway, but we've accelerated it as a response to COVID. We're now putting a lot of services that you used to have to come to the civic centre to do into our libraries. So we when we reopen services face to face, we reopen them in libraries first. So that's saying to people, you don't have to trek across the borough. You can go to somewhere that's ideally within 15 to 20 minutes. So it's looking at everything that a town centre could provide, looking, if you like, at decentralisation, even within a borough. What can we give people access to locally? How does that then support our town centres? And we've done that same with staff. So we're closing a number of our offices that are not in town centres, and we're expanding the opportunity for flexible working in those that are. And that, again, brings those services closer to people, gives them another reason to go to the town centre, and puts more of our staff in the town centres as customers.
Absolutely. John, same sort of question, really. How do we make the high street more accessible for everyone?
Well, localism is our huge opportunity that Corona has presented us with, isn't it? It's more sustainable. It makes more sense if we can bring vibrancy back and that element of amenity that Mark describes. Then why would you go anywhere else? We've all shown that you can work remotely a lot of the time, and there's a balance to be struck between online and offline working, which we're all going to get better at. So I think it's all about making blending amenity, community, and retail so that you can delight people, but also give them access to things they need to do easily so that they dwell and don't travel. If we can achieve that mix, then I think we'll see a huge resurgence outside of our city centres with local town centres.
And Jackie, are you seeing this sort of localism put into action? Because it's talked about, but that's one thing. Executing it's another.
Yeah, so I've been banging on about it for 4 years. So this is music to my ears. That everybody is seeing it, and we've probably been talking about it the same length of time, and maybe longer. But what we've got to focus on is, although it's nice to have that top headline, behavioural changes at the core of this. So my background was looking at social psychology. It's not easy. So however much we can offer the mix, we've still got to change that customer behaviour, and that will take time, it will take leadership, and it will take innovation.
Thank you so much. Well, look, I'm really sorry, but we are out of time. We managed to answer 11 questions, but there are 15 that we didn't. So apologies to those that didn't get their airing, but obviously, you know, the high street just throws up so many questions and queries, but really appreciate all the input from everyone that's been watching, and obviously from all the people who've participated today. So on behalf of myself, I'd like to thank the panel and hand over to Faye.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for chairing that so expertly. And obviously, thank you to all our panellists. That was a very thought-provoking conversation, and hopefully we can continue the dialogue online. Some really interesting insights there about obviously collaboration, accessibility, and how we can kind of curate high streets, particularly thinking about the communities in mind. Personally looking forward to doing a pop-up with Sook. I have my own collective, so I think, you know, that model works really well for sort of testing and trialing these, you know, new offers that we've talked about. So yeah, I think that's all for today. Just to remind everybody, we do have one more session, the final session of the conference, which is Regenerating the UK's Seaside Towns at 2 p.m. today. So please do attend that if you can. And thanks again for everybody for joining, and take care. Goodbye.